morning, everyone. My name is Talia Konkel, and together with Ev Fedorenko and the organizing team for this year's conference, I'm happy to say, welcome to the 2024 Cognitive Computational Neuroscience Conference. CCN has been going for 8 years now, including surviving 2 online conferences during the pandemic. And I'd like you to please raise your hand if you've been to a CCN conference before. Nice, solid, okay. Raise your hand if you're at the very first one. Wow. You are all conference elders. Okay. Now, what about the newcomers? Raise your hand if this is your first CCN. That. And let's push it even more. Raise your hand if this is your first scientific conference. Welcome. All right, so will everyone please take a moment to turn to someone nearby, and if you're lucky to be sitting next to someone who just raised their hand, make sure to reach out and take a moment to connect and greet. All right, pipe down. You have 4 days to do this. Very nice. Attention back here, please. This is what I get when I invite too much audience participation. All right, I'm just going to continue on. Thank you. Thank you, elders. I appreciate that. Okay. So CCN, that is Cognitive Computational Neuroscience, has always been about connecting people. The premise of this conference is that there are important conversations to be had and knowledge to be shared, bridging cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, and artificial intelligence researchers. And it's increasingly clear, as our conference continues on, and is having a bit of a moment right now, the field is, that there are deep synergies which connect these disciplines. So whether you are trying to discover the pieces of the mind and their algorithmic interactions, or discover the biological basis of information processing, or build artificial systems with complex behavioral capacities, you're probably here because you find value in the objectives of these other fields. And these primary disciplines make way to these interdisciplinary spaces and questions, bridging questions for the next generations of researchers to discover the links between mental capacities and their neural underpinnings, to leverage mathematical systems to gain insight into complex neural dynamics, or to develop models that articulate the mechanisms of our rich cognitive capacities. And of course, these give way to a new frontier of questions and a new generation of scholars who all share the deep goal to understand the principles of intelligent systems and how they work. I think everyone here believes that true insights are possible at this intersection, and that's what makes it worth it to do that heavy lifting and that additional learning that's required to port concepts from one field to the other and learn new analytical methods and do that terminological translation it takes to talk to someone. Here you'll meet people that are coming at the same questions as you, but with different background, but I think the same values. CCN is designed to be the meeting ground where this exchange is possible. As most of you probably realize, the next 4 days of programming that is lined up is nearly all contributed by you, by the community. CCN is all about being responsive and creative when it comes to how it runs. So if you're new here, you'll find we have different kinds of programming. Keynotes, some of which have accompanying tutorials, so you can not only hear the cutting-edge science, but understand how some of those things are actually carried out and do them yourself. We have groups that have engaged in generative adversarial collaborations to sort of focus in on articulating and discussing some of the key debates in our field. And others who have put together sort of community events that are responsive to the needs and the energy of the moment. So in general, active participation is welcomed. Check the schedule on the website or the back of your badge sneakily if you want to keep up with all the things that are going on. I want to highlight the members of this year's program committee, especially Nico Shook, the chair, for all the curation and the organizing work it took to put this year's complete schedule of events together. Okay, most of the events will be here in the main stage, Kresge Auditorium, but when we have parallel sessions, there are 2 other locations you need to know. The first is Little Kresge, which is directly underneath this stage, and you'll find the downward stairs out there. The second location is the Sala, which is in the Student Center on the 2nd floor. So if you take this staircase up, it will take you right to it, and you'll be able to get there really quickly. Also, since you might have noticed when you come in, it's raining, it occurred to me that the lobby area of Kresge is maybe not quite big enough to hold everyone here all at the same time. So as you exit, consider also going outside or underneath the awning, maybe even dash across to the Student Center. Basically try and keep the circulation going out of respect for all the people who need coffee as badly as you do too. The poster sessions will be held in the Johnson Ice Rink. So to get there, you basically walk towards the Student Center, hang a left, along the side of the building, and you'll see the entry to the sports complex. We have about 500 or so posters this year. Special thanks to Jan Charest and the Technical Program Committee who handled all the paper submissions and the reviewing process this year. The social event is on Wednesday night and will be held at the MIT Museum, which is a 10 to 15-minute walk across the MIT campus. There'll be food, drink, music, science, art, so basically a perfect combination. Don't want to miss it, but you do need a ticket to get into the event. So if you'd like to attend and you haven't bought your ticket yet, please do so ahead of time. You can do that at the registration desk. And a huge thank you to Greta Tuchkute and Jacob Prince and the whole trainee organizing committee, as well as the volunteers. This group of students and postdocs not only planned this entire social event, but they've also worked behind the scenes to make sure the conference goers' needs are met. For example, they've set up a CCN Discord server for chatter and information exchange during the conference. Events are being live streamed on our YouTube channel, tweeted about here, and thank you to Kim Stackenfeld and the Communications Committee for all their informative and, dare I say, upbeat messaging. This year, CCN partnered with a new conference management team whose expertise, responsiveness, and effort simply cannot be overstated. So thank you to Shawnee and Jeff Wilson, Lynn Flannery, and the entire Meeting Perfect team. Truly impressive. Finally, thank you to our sponsors, especially MIT's McGovern Institute, MIT's Brain and Cognitive Science Department, Harvard's Mind Brain Behavior Initiative, MIT's Quest for Intelligence, and the Simons Foundation for their generous contributions. This sponsorship goes directly towards making the conference more affordable, and we are grateful for and proud of these contributors. And with that, it is time to science. So we are going to kick off with a keynote from Professor Matthias Bethge. While he's getting set up, I will turn the microphone over to Professor Judy Fan for the introduction. So enjoy day 1 of CCN, everyone, and see you tonight at the welcome reception. Thank you very much.
All right, it's great to see you all here. My name is Judy Fan, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Stanford University, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here in my capacity as a member of the program committee at CCN to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Matthias Bethge. Matthias Bethge is a professor of computational neuroscience and machine learning at the University of Tübingen and director of the Tübingen AI Center. He's perfect to kick off this year's CCN, as he and his work truly exemplify the spirit of this conference. He's a cognitive computational neuroscientist who has done groundbreaking work bridging the gap between biological and artificial intelligence with a focus on reverse engineering perceptual computations in the brain by comparing state-of-the-art machine learning methods to both behavioral and neural data. His lab has pioneered influential models and tools that have advanced both neuroscience and AI, including neural style transfer, algorithmic methods to take the style of one image and apply it to another, as well as deep lab cut, open software leveraging deep learning to perform efficient animal pose estimation in images and video. More recently, work in his lab has centered on the problem of lifelong learning in brains and machines, which I believe he will tell us more about in today's talk. And what I find particularly remarkable and inspiring, really, about Professor Bethge is that in addition to the tremendous impact he has made on the field of cognitive computational neuroscience, he has also been an unstoppable force when it comes to bringing CCN into the wider world and in building community through technology transfer and institution building, including an artificial intelligence competition open to teams of high school students across Germany, and the ELIS initiative, a network of machine learning laboratories located throughout Europe. As you can see, the scope of his intellectual and creative vision is tremendous, as is commitment to wrestling with the most fundamental questions in neuroscience with the sharpest possible tools. We are all in for a huge treat. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Matthias Bethge.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks so much for having me here. I feel very honored and very excited. So I also wanted to start with a high-level definition of what I'm doing. So I prefer to use the term neuro AI. It's shorter and it's also some more focus on AI. But it also includes studying the brain. So it's an analysis approach. So we analyze the brain. And also a synthesis approach, so building machines to solve cognitive tasks. And so I have this picture of Richard Feynman here for his famous quote, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." So to me, it's I definitely share this sentiment. I really need to build things in order to be able to understand it. And so I will start with some view back on pattern recognition. I think that is a big success story in cognitive computation in neuroscience between AI and neuroscience, starting, with the problem of recognizing stuff in the world, for instance, a muffin, or if it becomes more complicated and you have muffins and dog faces, they actually look quite similar on the level of the retina, but then in the ventral stream and probably elsewhere in the brain, we can solve this pattern recognition task. And based on work of Huber and Wiese, I think very early on, Fukushima was the first who made this wild guess of abstracting away the details and saying, okay, if this is more or less a convolutional network where we stack simple and complex cells on top of each other, basically optimizing for selectivity and invariance, then that might be a pattern recognition machine explaining what the brain is doing. And that idea has been very thriving both in neuroscience and in machine learning. I think, I really like this review paper of Jim and Nicole and David, and which has really illustrated this idea also for neuroscience. And in machine learning, it corresponds to the idea that you do a nonlinear feature space embedding, and afterwards, after this nonlinear feature space embedding, you can classify things with a simple linear classifier. or a simple readout. And for me, there was one paper that convinced me that deep learning is taking off, which was not AlexNet directly, but it was this paper from Trevor Derritt's group, when they basically took AlexNet as a complex nonlinear feature space embedding and used it to do all kinds of other tasks by a transfer learning approach. So to illustrate this, basically, you can use something like ImageNet to train a complex feature space embedding, and then you preserve most of those features, and with much less data, you can now, in the extreme case, only optimize your last layers, your readout, in order to solve a new task. And that was, for us, basically also the entry towards deep learning. So we didn't train big networks at the beginning, but we rather downloaded them and applied them to the problem of saliency prediction, so where people look. So basically the task, I think you're very familiar with this, is when you have an image and you have people observing these images in free viewing conditions, you can record the density where the fixations land, and then the task is to predict how these densities differ depending on the image content. And so in our first work with AlexNet was basically this transfer learning approach that I just described, training a relatively simple readout on top of AlexNet, introducing transfer learning to the saliency domain. And since then, you can see in the upper quadrant, basically all the leading models are using this approach. And so then Matthias has went on and using more complicated, more recent backbones, further pushing the performance, and now most recently we actually got better than the gold standard that we used previously, so we also had to improve the gold standard in order to stay below 100% performance here. So since many of you might be interested in eye movement predictions, I also mentioned this work, so there's a review paper on this. But this is only focusing on the prediction problem, but the machinery, the transfer learning machinery, can be applied to many, many other problems as well. And the networks that we developed there, the technology is basically quite generic. So whenever you want to solve transfer learning problems, the learning pipeline is quite well engineered by now. And another problem that came up somewhat later in the lab when Mackenzie and Alex Matthias joined as postdocs was to track the behavior of animals. And to do this in a markerless fashion, we again applied the transfer learning trick. And we were super surprised that then only 100 labels were basically enough to transfer learn with the ImageNet features where these key points are moving. And then Mackenzie and Alex have developed this much further. So this is the transfer learning perspective on these feature spaces. There's another perspective that has also been mentioned in that review paper already, which is, I think Jim called it untangling. There's also a lot of work in machine learning on disentangling, so I use the term disentangling here. But it's basically that you want to map things into a coordinate system where things like content and style, different parameters, semantic parameters, become orthogonal, somehow disentangle. And as Julie mentioned earlier, we had some work on disentangling content from style, and also quite early on with deep neural networks, which is extracting the textual information from deep network features and the content information from a high-level layer of a deep neural network, and then recombining them, trying to, similar to an inverse Fourier transform, trying to resynthesize an image, but you have to do an optimization approach. And in this way, you can generate nice pictures of your hometown in different styles. So that's fun. Has also been fun for many people. but it's also a possibility to synthesize stimuli that we can then use for psychophysical experiments again in order to see how, what type of features are used by neural networks to determine the content of an image. So here in this illustration, we combined a texture of an elephant with a cat image in order to generate a cat image in elephant style. And so now you can, so we have 16 high-level classes in the ImageNet hierarchy, and also generated more such images. And so sometimes they look a bit funny, but all of those images have a Q conflict that the texture has been taken from one image category and the shape has been taken from a different category. And in this way, we can now ask when a human or a neural network classifies such an image, whether it's rather relying on the shape information or on the texture information. And in this diagram, you can see on the left is the shape information that is primarily used by humans. So humans, more than 90% of the time, rely on the shape information, while the early CNNs had a heavy bias towards using texture information. So these are AlexNet, GoogleNet, and VGG16 in this study. And another difference that we observed early on is that the noise robustness of these early networks were not very good. So in comparison to humans, when you had some sensor noise on the image, the performance degraded much faster. And that is also related, of course, if you have a texture bias, then the sensor noise has a strong effect on the texture. So now, when you train neural networks on noisy images, it's easy to make them also robust against this particular noise that you're training on. But, and so it was also easy to get superhuman performance when you train on, say, white noise and you test on white noise. Gaussian noise or additive noise or salt and pepper noise. So these are two different types of noises that have different statistics but look quite similar to humans, right? So we wouldn't bother. But if you change the training and the testing, so during training you use salt and pepper noise and during testing you use additive noise, that might mess up your robustness. So in the early days, this was already enough to destroy the performance. And so one approach that you can always take in order to make networks more robust is also to do data augmentation. And so since there was this strong texture bias, you can try to make them less sensitive to texture by introducing texture noise. And so by this approach, we actually managed to get the same performance on the normal images, but also getting the same performance on texturized images. So making the network, the recognition invariant against the style. And then if you look again at these biases, this introduces a much stronger shape bias now for the neural networks, and also a better noise robustness, even though this noise wasn't exactly the noise that we are testing on. So here this is still the additive noise test, but the training has only been on the stylized noise. All right, so far so good. All in all, there have been many differences between human and machine perception. I've been highlighting quickly the shape versus texture difference. I mean, we made some progress in reducing this difference. There's, of course, still many such differences. Another problem that is still unsolved is the adversarial robustness or the lack of adversarial robustness. So with basically imperceptual perturbations, you can make a machine believe any other category, not just maybe one coincidental similarity for us, like an Ames chair or so, we might confuse, but it's hard to tell us that a truck is the same like a duck or something. And so that is, even though there's some progress also in machine learning, I think there's still a big discrepancy there. So all in all, it seems that there's a difference in the way how neural networks generalize and how brains generalize. And so from a machine learning point of view, from a theoretical point of view, when you learn, you start with a feature space of all possible decision rules, and then you restrict your possible solutions by only taking those algorithms that, or those decision rules that yield a small training error. And if you further cross-validate on a test set, you can even further reduce your set of possible decision rules. However, if we think of, say, the brain or the way how we can categorize images, so indicated here by the intended solution, this approach is not enough, right? So we get too many solutions that yield a small cross-validation error on the training set, but this is not constraining enough to get to the intended solution. One can then come up with all kinds of out-of-domain testing and hope to further shrink this set and approach this, but it's also not clear how successful that would be. So this was towards the end of Corona. Alyosha Efros was in Tübingen, and I really like how he talks about machine learning and this quote here also fully resonated with me. So he was claiming we are raising a generation of algorithms who can only cram for the test, right? And in the same talk, he was also talking about the pre-dataset era, where we just made up models in computer vision, then the dataset era, where we started to train networks on data, and now basically we are approaching or in the post-dataset era, where a single dataset is not enough. We want to generalize beyond the dataset that we have been training on. And so the question is, from a machine learning point of view, independent, identically distributed training samples has been like the framework for generalization for a long time, for the standard framework. The natural extension that I think many people have been thinking about, and that also was, I think, the idea behind disentangling, is that it should be possible to generalize and to solve the curse of dimensionality if you can use the combinatorics of learned concepts. So if you somehow figure out how things compose, then you don't have to exhaustively go through all exponential combinations in order to learn what happens in the future, but you only have to learn the combination rule and the individual components. In this work, we figured that there are quite some differences between disentanglement and compositional generalization, so I think many people are motivated in studying disentanglement by hoping that it yields better generalization, but oftentimes this is not the case. And so we also try to build some theoretical work on, from first principles, how to come up with a theory of compositional generalization. But it's obviously not easy, and it has also not been used by what I'm telling you about next, which was very successful. So next, I'm talking to you about this guy, Alan Turing, who dreamed up something like ChatGPT a long time ago. And actually in this paper here in 1950, it's a very nice paper. It starts with a sentence, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? And then he basically first defines what is a machine, like a discrete state machine, and whether it can be used to simulate brains. Then trying to define what thinking means using the Turing test, basically coming up, as you know, the idea that if you don't feel like you are able to distinguish between a human and a machine when you are chatting with a chat interface, then you have passed the Turing test with your machine. Interestingly, he also thinks about the capacity of the human brain in this paper, estimating the number of bits to be 10 to the 10 to 10 to the 15 bits as amount of memory, and he predicted that then a lot of future development in computer science will go into expanding the memory. And then he got worried about that it might be basically impossible to program all that memory. So it would be necessary to have machine learning such that machines learn like kids. So that's nice. And if we put this on a time arrow, machine learning hasn't been too popular for a long time, actually. So there were a few people working on this, but the scaling up of memory definitely happened. After the breakthrough of deep neural networks, of convolutional neural networks, first the scaling up of data sets took place. And also, obviously, GPUs made a big difference, so scaling up of compute was very important as well. Most of the concepts have been around for a long time that were necessary before. So now we are in this era where basically ChatGPT has surprised us, I would say, in addressing the Turing test. And so we can ask the question, what's missing between current foundation models and human-like thinking? And now I'm coming to the more experimental part of my talk. I think it's about self-made reality. And in order to get some testing here in the room, I want you to raise your hand if you see this dress like me in white and gold. Okay, and now I want everyone to raise their hand who sees this in black and blue. Okay, now you can talk to your neighbor who didn't raise their hand and figure out what's wrong with their reality. All right. Thanks for joining in this experiment. I think it's great that you also had these discussions, right? Because it's very normal for us that we are responsible for we feel responsible for our perception. And if we meet someone who has a different perception, we start discussing and trying to figure out where does this difference come from? And so we are very used to the fact that reality is not just given, right? So as it is for foundation models in some sense, which is given by the company training it maybe. And so we have to take responsibility for the reality that is generated. And that is actually, so thinking about machine learning, there's not too much of engineering exploration of this. So the best example, the best studied example that I'm aware of is simultaneous localization and mapping, which is basically also very similar to what you study in neuroscience when you put a rat in a labyrinth and trying to learn a new labyrinth. And whenever you get into a new environment, you basically have to learn and infer on the fly, right? So it's a stream of data coming in. There's no internet that you can download before. You have to act. You use your acting as a tinkering also about figuring out how your reality works. And it's very intrinsically motivated. It's intrinsic learning. So which is fundamentally different from the data pipeline, the data-centric learning paradigm that we have in foundation model learning. And I mean, it's not so easy to approach this. Obviously, also, foundation models have made or opened new possibilities in enabling agents to do more interesting things. And so one thing that we started to try recently is basically by taking this idea of navigation in space to navigating in literature, right? So that's quite possible too. If you read through papers, some ideas might look familiar and so on, and then you might want to refer to them again. So it's a bit similar to place localization and the things that you have to solve in visual SLAM. So the long-term goal could be phrased, can we build an AI agent who can navigate the scientific literature in a scholarly way, or even become a science historian? So this is the very beginning, baby step. We took architecture from basically a software engineering agent, and which builds an interface to certain things that the agent can do. And the things we allow the algorithm, here to do, first the task is basically, if you have a sentence in a paper like this one, ESIM is another high-performing model for sentence pair classification tasks, particularly when used with AMO embeddings. Then you can mask out the citation, right, and can ask the AI agent what is the correct citation. And ideally, it would answer then its deep contextualized word representations by Peters et al. And the way how it's done is, you can see on the right-hand side, there are certain actions that the algorithm can do. It can search in like Google Scholar search, sort it after citations or relevance. It can read the text, and then it can select the paper. So that allows you to compare every step of this action also with humans, and you can analyze where things go wrong and where the differences are. And we took out all the, so we have only a few more than 100 paper or references in this benchmark. And they are highly curated. We try to make them least controversial. And so we already got some feedback from other people, oh, this is not good. And so we updated it again. And and we took out all the examples that could be solved by GPT just by heart, so that you actually have to act, that you have to take an agent's approach. And then you can see that GPT-4o can solve 1/3 of these, and so it's a challenging task. And the other Llama 3 gets 21%. Okay. So what I'm trying to suggest is, if you think of this as maybe something like math levels, but instead of computation, I prefer to put perception and behavior on top. and algorithms being this interface between linking perception and behavior to the computation, then yeah, the linking part is basically given by the algorithms. And one big difference we have is that if you think of an agent solving a task, it has to be acting in a very integrated fashion, right? So it's not just the ventral stream that is doing this, but it's the entire brain. And I think this, in this sense, the term reality has somehow the notion of this multi-scale, temporal, spatial information integration that provides the basis on which we do both self-logging and planning. And I think it would be fantastic to have a more integrative neuro-AI conceptualization with an algorithmic understanding of the brain's reality. So it's, as I mentioned, about data integration. And again, here we have not so much help from machine learning yet. There are examples like SLAM, but and foundation models are also helpful in the sense that they have taught us a lot how to deal with large-scale data, because, again, we have to deal with a lot of data, right? So we do lifelong learning. We integrate over lots and lots of data. But we have to do it on the fly. We cannot first bring the data in the perfect order, sort them, and do the very specific training schedule, but it's more like learning while doing. So I emphasize this here with a quote, "The road to success is always under construction." So this is very important, that oftentimes in science we think about reality also like a static idea that we are trying to approach. But in the reality of our reality is that it's always under construction, and it's also the fun of science that we basically have all these ideas around, and and we have to make decisions, trade-offs. It's costly to investigate things, so we, based on where we want to invest our time and resources, we make decisions, and then that's how we build our models. So my proposal for integrative neuro-AI is about epistemic or reality engineering. I cannot quite decide between the two terms. Basically, reality engineering emphasizes more the perspective of the brain that needs to engineer also its own reality. And epistemic engineering is more like how we, maybe as scientists, think about methods to deal with the epistemic uncertainty of models that need to learn on the fly. Yeah, so I'm giving here a definition. I think reality is something like a compressive mapping of streaming data into a structured semantic representation for self-logging and planning that is subject to lifelong learning. So that's kind of the problem from an algorithmic point of view. And now I'm coming up with some hunches, hypotheses, what I think is crucial to solve that problem. And the first I'm mentioning here is what I call rudimentary compositionality. So when you look at disentanglement work and also geometric machine learning, we have a lot of results on group structure and nice mathematically understood symmetries that we can leverage in order to get better generalization and to generalize and deal with a complex world. However, the truth is, as an agent running around in the world, I don't know this structure beforehand, and I have to start with some hypotheses and then learn them on the fly. And oftentimes it might not be a group structure, but a monoid structure or something even less structured, and so it's quite challenging. But it's clear that we have to leverage reusable components all the time. It's the only way to successfully navigate through the world and behave in the world is that we re-ID things, that we re-identify stuff. Otherwise, we would be lost. And so I think a key component is like understanding algorithms that allow us to a lifelong disentanglement of reusable components. And with that, I mean something like objects and their transformations from unique compositions. So that's also like a landmark or anything that you memorize is still need to be re-IDable, but the uniqueness comes from the combination of its re-identifiable components. And the way how these might be learned, there might be things like Gestalt psychology might help to extract those components. Lifelong learning has been focusing a lot on catastrophic forgetting. So oftentimes in the beginning just with data sets like MNIST, and depending on if you first learn to discriminate ones from twos and threes from fours, then you start forgetting how to discriminate a 1 from a 2. And obviously, also this has to be scalable, right? So we cannot restrict ourselves to MNIST. We have to learn at the same amount as foundation models are learning at the moment if we want to cope with a rich visual world around us. And the idea is that the reusability, the compositionality is actually the key also for lifelong learning that avoids catastrophic forgetting, because you know basically what to update and what you don't want to update in your model. Finally, self-supervision is obviously required if you don't have a supervisor around all the time, but not just self-supervision across time, but I think what's crucial is between action and perception, which also allows you basically to use your actions to tinker around with the reality and probe things, right? It's the epistemic tinkering that you can do. And I think that is also, as an example, again from SLAM, from self-localization and mapping, these robots can have active learning strategies in order to figure out whether they have a loop closure or not, right? So when you come back to a place where you have been before, you have to make a discrete decision whether you have been at that place before or not. And that is very similar to the problem of symbol grounding, right? There's no wake, maybe, yeah, I mean, you can say maybe, but then you have to store many different alternatives about the word and put probabilities to them, and that gets very costly very quickly. Ideally, you can somehow figure out by comparing your odometric estimate from your actions, whether your action ultimately has implemented an identity transformation, or and only something changed, maybe the lighting conditions changed in your environment, and then you can use that as a supervisory signal to tell your pattern recognition machine that you should discount these lighting changes because you're really sure that you implemented an identity transformation, that you did a loop closure by your actions, and vice versa. And then this is also a fun statement. So for people who love probabilities, I love probabilities, but I don't think that basically the brain can use Bayesian updates in the way how we typically build Markov models or so. But since the state space itself, if you basically learn the reusable components all the time and they are variable, then your state space is not a fixed given, and then it becomes really messy to think of it in terms of probabilistic models. So I guess, I mean, you can also apply Bayesian analysis to stock markets or so. or to the economy, but I think the truth is that the way how the economy works is more like things get reused or don't get reused, and that's the way how more successful models survive and less successful models don't survive. And finally, this ecological aspect also holds, of course, between different agents, between humans, and we share our reusable components all the time. The language that I'm using is something that was shared to me a long time ago, and we share this. And so it's clear that we would run around with a very different reality in our brain if we wouldn't share these artifacts that we have been generating in the past. All right, so I have two current works related to these points. So one is on the rudimentary compositionality and the extraction of reusable components. First I mentioned two works that are maybe you might want to look into in order to read up on more of the details on continual learning with compositional representations. And the other paper by Klaus Greff on the binding problem in ANNs I find also quite useful to explain these ideas. What I'm talking about now is a very concrete inductive bias or idea how brains might infer reusable components. And the easiest way of re-identification is if you sit still and then something is moving by, right? Ideally not too fast, so you can track it. And so you have something that changes, but the object itself, I mean, we call it object, something stays constant, and so it helps a lot to look at the last frame to explain the next frame. And this is exactly the structure of objects and the transformations that allow you to simplify the world. And so I demonstrate this here. So that helps certainly to separate the object. But what is also possible for humans is to have this object segmentation just by motion information. So we can get rid of all the information in the RGB signals by using random dot patterns that only match the optic flow. And we can also do this with more interesting objects. And when you apply current machine vision algorithms for motion segmentation on this type of data, this is what you get. You get like perfect segmentation for the RGB image, but for the random dot movie, basically you don't get any segmentation. And that is due to the fact, I mean, or you can see it here, that the okay, this doesn't work anymore. That the optic flow is basically not present, right? So the optic flow estimate didn't work. And now we have beautiful work from a long time ago already on optic flow estimation in the brain with the motion energy model, which has been mapped out even up to the parameters of the motion energy model. And you can download a filter bank doing this motion energy computation for you. And we use that now in combination with motion segmentation. And suddenly you get a functional of optic flow estimate, and the segmentation also works quite well. So now, in order to make this comparison between human and machines more precise, we can also do psychophysics both with machines and humans. And so I do this with you too, so that you get something to do. So please fixate on the center of the random dot image, and then I start the movie, and now decide which shape you have seen, F or J. F? That's right. Okay, it's not the optimal psychophysics condition here, but humans are actually not bad in doing this. And if we compare humans to machines, we can get basically average performance. For humans, we got something like close to 90%. And for all the motion segmentation algorithms, state-of-the-art algorithms from machine learning, you get at best something like 80%, even though you don't have any measurement noise there and so on. And with the motion energy model, we got even better performance, so that is a strong indicator that this might be a good model for how we estimate motion, besides many other evidence. Another interesting fun fact is the motion estimation with a motion energy model is also better in terms of noise robustness than most of the so what machines are using today is more like two-frame feature matching because it's less expensive to do the training, right? So they don't like to integrate over a long time. And so the noise robustness is almost always better for the motion energy model, apart from foggy conditions, which is interesting because humans are known to be particularly bad in fog, to underestimate the speed. All right, that was this example. Then I want to give you another work on this point of disentangled learning to prevent catastrophic forgetting. So this is a very conceptual work. It's a variant that we call infinite D-sprites. So for those of you who know D-sprites, it's basically as shapes and they undergo affine transformations. And in order to make this richer and a bit more structured, we have these black and white shaped shapes, and we have a way to generate infinitely many of them. And you can think of the task basically as a match to sample task. So you have a stream of data. It's never ending. There will be always a new shape coming up. And your task is to be able to learn to recognize if you have seen a shape before, and to discount if it has different position, scale, or orientation. So like a typical invariance transformation. And if you, so here's just another slide showing for each shape all the different, or always two different scales and different positions and different orientations, so you get basically equivalence classes out of this from these transformations. And that gives you a classification problem that is defined by the invariance group. Now, if you would do normal continual learning with learning without forgetting, synaptic intelligence, other regularization methods, you will get sooner or later catastrophic forgetting. And when you train a network in a way that during the learning, you basically disentangle the information that is relevant to learn the transformation from the information to memorize the shape, then you only get better because you'll be able to model the invariance transformation better and better over time. And one way to do this, which is not what I'm proposing, that this is how it's done in the brain, is that you can store a normalized representative for each equivalence class. So you have a shape in a certain orientation and size, and then you always map the new incoming shapes to this normalized standard size, orientation, and position. The main thing is that you have to solve the correspondence problem between the new items and the remaining ones. Okay. Yeah. It's, so the last 2 points here, or these 2 points are, I think, very much at the heart of this epistemic engineering, and they lack a lot of work in machine learning. So I cannot, unfortunately, present you any results on that, and it's also in terms of time, would be too much. But I think it relates to many aspects that many of you have been thinking about. Again, I would highlight the example of simultaneous localization and mapping, but thinking of it in a more general term, right? So basically, we always stick to these simple conditions where you only learn one labyrinth and then you stop. Think of it, you put a camera on your bike, and you want your bike to remember any place that you have been in the past, and build a multi-scale model of it that can somehow decide what aspects to remember and what to forget, and build a world model to navigate and tell you next time when you encounter, oh, I have been here before, maybe you better turn right, I thought it was boring going left here. So something like that. And that's, yeah, I think very interesting and challenging from an AI perspective. It's not so clear how to benchmark these things, but it's, I think, a very much needed approach and would be very helpful also for understanding how the brain integrates information. I think that also, if you think of space, where you are is definitely a very important component to how you organize reality. I'm not saying that this is, so all these discussions about hippocampus, whether it's about space or memorization or like beyond, I think it's both. There's some strong emphasis on space because space is particularly important to decide what about your reality, right? So if you are sitting in front of your television and you see a lot of stuff in your television, then this is a very different interpretation than when you actually are on your bike and you see a lot of stuff, while your estimate is that you're changing locations and you are outside. Yeah. So again, my friend Alyosha here also has this real-world motivation. Biological agents never see the same data twice. And every new piece of data is first test, then train. This is exactly what we need, right? And we don't really have much in machine learning. So finally, cognitive ecology is a whole field of its own. I want to make some high-level remarks here. So about the difference between individual realities and shared realities. To clarify this quote, since science and everyday life cannot and should not be separated, science for me gives a partial explanation for life. Insofar as it goes, it is based on fact, experience, and experiment, is a quote by Rosalind Franklin. And but I think it's true that this, I think we also do science, or when I think about education at school, I often regret that kids are just presented knowledge and not in a way that they can basically actively explore knowledge as an agent trying to make it relevant. And I think every one of us has their own reality that matters, and that we somehow sync with tools for fostering the shared reality. We use language. Maps are very interesting. So you know the story of how maps, in former days, people estimated the size of their cities quite differently depending on how much they liked them and so on. Now we have all this technology to agree on that better. But I think it's very important, so the synchronization with a peer group only works if you have a buy-in into those tools and if you have a participatory, if you can participate in using them. And so I think for us as scientists, we should also think about how to make a better impact there. Now I quickly want to mention that also this shared reality has an impact on us. For instance, when GPT got very successful, I think like maybe many of us also got affected by this AGI mantra and that scale is all you need. And when we were last year at the conference in TTC on neuro AI, lots of people were there, and we basically had many discussions, why modeling the brain, right? So if you think of this AGI mantra and scale is all you need, you can rethink your question, do we know what we are doing here? And I think that one motivation for me definitely is that we'll never be approached by AGI or scale is understanding how brains create their reality. Yeah, so I basically try to replace the AGI mantra by the reality engineering mantra. I think it's good to think about the impact that this could have in building a better shared reality and better understanding how we create our and others' realities. I think that we basically are probably in the position as the Greeks were in understanding like atoms work, right? So they also had quite some fundamental ideas, but they really didn't engineer it out yet. And I think we now have the tools to take an engineering approach to these philosophical questions and psychological questions that are really important also for social science and so on. And I think for this conference and all year round, I think it has a super nice perspective that we can make an impact beyond the values of just money and economy to the social science values of humanity, right? So our brains, our reality is what matters for our values. And I think we don't have a very good understanding yet how that works. We have our word model understandings, and we have tools to make progress there. I quickly mention Apo has some nice work on painful intelligence, where he's basically thinking about how algorithmic thinking of learning and how that relates to human suffering. It's on arXiv, the paper, and another work by Neil Lawrence. He wrote a book. This is not on arXiv. You have to buy it. It's, I think, 20 euros or so. Also interesting, comparing humans and machines. What's the difference? And I close with this final quote. Humanity faces two absolutely fundamental problems of learning. So I like to emphasize that it's about learning here. Learning about the universe and ourselves and other forms of life as part of the universe, and learning how to create genuinely civilized, wise world. We have solved the first problem of learning. We did that in the 17th century when we created modern science. But we have not yet solved the second problem. And I think, so I share this sentiment, and it's kind of course, nobody knows how to solve it, but the good thing about also in science is you don't have to solve or know everything about the atom in the beginning. You can leave it to the community to do the engineering, and then you make much progress. And I hope maybe with cognitive computational neuroscience, we also share the work of figuring out how our realities are created, and then maybe we also solve the second problem of learning. Thanks a lot for your attention. And also thanks to my group, because they have also to suffer these type of thoughts and trying to deal with the complexity of this. And if you are not afraid of such mighty, diverse approaches, then let me know.
Thanks so much, Matthias, for the beautiful talk. We break now for lunch until 2 p.m. when we'll resume with the first community building event. Enjoy lunch.